Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing, the Monday edition. I'm sorry, it's Thursday. I am Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. And, some days I have no idea what day of the week it is either. So honest mistake. This week, we'd like to welcome one of our new members, the Juliet Chocolates Factory, located in Washington, Michigan. They have been serving delicious chocolates for over 40 years. We welcome owner Jacob Newby and his team. And of course, we are welcoming this member on behalf of our sponsor, Marana Group, a data document and distribution company in Kalamazoo. Welcome to them and all of our other new members.
One of the things I love, Sarah, about as we do this, Marana Group has been so generous and said rather than just focus on them, they always say just pick a new member, somebody that joined recently, and highlight them on Thursdays. And you get a sense for the variety of small business. I mean, people think of small business in a certain way, and maybe whatever your context is, certain industries, but it's every single industry that you can think of, and then like a whole bunch of stuff you never thought of. That people have got, they've got something that they're really good at. They do very special, and they've built a business and a life and created opportunity for a community and others around it. So it's one of the things I've really enjoyed about this Thursday sponsors highlight is just to get a little bit of a taste for how diversified the small business economy is, and just a little insight into what our 30,000 membership brings to the table.
I agree. All right, let's get into today's show. It's been a big day in the legislature, and there's been some tax cuts. Brian, what can you tell us?
Yeah, big day indeed. In fact, we're really thrilled with the way that the legislature, and these come from the legislative Republican caucuses of the House and the Senate, that are coalescing around tax cuts in response to continued consensus revenue estimating growth for state government. So just for setting context, when back, I used to be in office. So the very first budget that Rick Snyder and I were responsible for, state budget was somewhere around $47 billion, which I'm from a little town called Portland. 47 billion is still a lot to me, but compared to what the state government has today, it's been pretty breathtaking growth, especially over the last couple of years. So even before these new revenue estimates came in for state government, it was the governor's proposed budget was 74 billion. It's what we're expecting to come out tomorrow from the consensus revenue estimating conference between the House and Senate and Treasury, is for it to be more than 5 billion on top of that. So we've seen like just revenue growth after revenue growth after revenue growth at the same. So the state government is awash with cash, and it's difficult to increase spending that much and do it well or do it without being wasteful. So at the same time, though, as we know that our members and citizens are really reeling through rising costs in almost every way and in almost every industry. And so what the legislature has coalesced around and are kind of aggressively moving toward is a cut in the personal income tax rate. Now, the individual income tax is the tax that most small businesses pay as a business tax, because if you're a pass-through entity, S corporation, an LLC, limited partnership, a sole proprietor, even it's either your Schedule E or your Schedule C, or you've got the personal income tax is where you pay your main tax. That's at 4.25%, and they're proposing to reduce that tax down to 4%, and then also to increase something called the Earned Income Tax Credit. This is another thing that SBAM has been supporting over the last several months as we've seen revenues increase. The Earned Income Tax Credit, it's a federal credit, and then the state kind of adds on to the federal credit. And so it exists today. There's a proposal to increase it. The reason that SBAM got behind an increase and have been advocating for months on an increase in this tax credit is because it is an incentive to work. So if you have a job and it's a lower income job, then you get a tax credit as essentially a reward for working, even if all you can find is lower wage work. And so this is a really important kind of juxtaposition to the previous struggles we've had over the last few years of not finding enough people to work and the government providing incentives to not work. And so this is kind of the opposite, an incentive to work, a reward to work. And so the way that the mechanics, the way this works is the federal credit stays the same, whatever your earned income tax credit is on the federal level, which can be big, sometimes thousands of dollars. The state will just add, under this proposal, would add on 20%. So if your federal credit was $1,000, then the state would give you an extra $200 on your tax return. And so it's a really good approach toward rewarding people that work, and if their main work is available through like an entry-level type position. So this is really a big day. There's other components to their plan as well, but this is one that really goes right at the heart of a pro-business style of a tax cut, is to say, look, we're gonna reduce the rate of the main tax that most small businesses pay, and we're going to incentivize people to work and get back in the workforce. And of course, is the main challenge that we've heard over the last really 2 years now, since the reopening of the economy started. Just kind of winning people back into the workforce has been very difficult. Well, one other thing, just for situational awareness, or a couple other components that aren't necessarily business components, but just so you know, they're proposing to increase the individual exemptions. So you have income exemptions up to $5,000 per person. In the personal tax code today, they're proposing to increase that by $1,800. And then there's a retiree tax exemption of the first $20,000 in income, or $40,000 per couple. They're going to increase that $1,800 per person as well, and then add in a child tax credit of $500. So those are the main moving pieces. I think this is a multi-billion-dollar overall package. And while you're going to see the consensus revenue estimating conference, I think, will be north of $5 billion extra. I find it to be eminently reasonable, and I'm hopeful that the governor will support the idea of taking some of this windfall that state government has received and returning it back to the hardworking citizens of Michigan, including, and I'll say from our standpoint, especially entrepreneurs that create so much opportunity in every single community across our state.
Definitely good news all around. Let's talk about a couple other workforce components. The first is childcare. We've talked a lot about childcare, excuse me, on the show, and the challenges that people have in terms of getting reliable, affordable daycare for their kids. And the governor announced $100 million in various childcare funding to open new programs and help fund existing providers. What can you share?
Yeah, and you might recall that there was a while back, when we'd covered this previously, that there was a big portion of the federal money that the state received, which was dedicated for childcare, and it was a big number. It was over $1 billion. I think it was $1.4 billion. A lot of that was for reimbursement rates to providers that provide low-income individuals childcare to help them in going back to work at school. So, but we didn't know a lot about the details on what the plans are for the rest of the money. And so $100 million of that federal COVID relief, of those federal COVID relief dollars, will be going into an initiative to expand or open, in other words, to support startup of 1,000 childcare programs and providers across the state. And that's a pretty big number. There are, I was looking to see if I had written down, it looks like maybe I didn't, but, oh, here we go. There are just under 8,000 providers. So the idea of either expanding, helping those providers to expand, or new providers to form, the goal of having 1,000 expanding. And the number of providers has been consistently falling over recent years. There's a lot of reasons for that, which we don't necessarily need to go into here at the moment. But even as there's incredible demand for service, a lot of places that don't have any capacity at all, we saw the total number of providers drop by a couple hundred in the last year. So it was a little over 8,000, now a little under 8,000 in total providers. So the initiative has four main components to it. This $100 million allocation: $51.1 million to renovate and build childcare facilities. So sometimes the problem with expanding is the physical space, and so a big chunk, about half of the dollars, will be allocated toward renovating and building new facilities, I assume in a grant type of a process. 23 million for startup grants to help new providers get up and running. And there's a lot, it just takes a lot to get a new enterprise off the ground. And we don't necessarily think of these as businesses. Of course, many childcare providers are businesses. There are some government childcare providers as well, early childhood education programs. Sometimes are government, sometimes are privately owned. 11.4 million to recruit, train, and retain early educators, including a $4 million apprenticeship program for early educators. So the fact that you've got childcare, like basic childcare, but some childcare does come with certified early education instructors, and especially for those of that preschool type of an age, childcare providers that want to offer a real curriculum. There are requirements for the staff. So some dollars for training and retaining the early childhood education staff, again, both in the public and the private sector. And then 14.3 billion to speed up the licensing process, or million. State government, we talk millions usually, and federal government more billions and trillions. Although state government now is getting into, billions are often referred to or allocated. But the licensing process to speed it up, so that it basically, if you were to talk to most any child care provider, and we have a lot of child care provider members here, it's just the regulatory process is very onerous. And obviously you're going to have regulations around child care providers. That's not something that's going to go away. However, it has gotten to a point where when people are leaving the industry, this is one of the things that they point back to, is they want to care for kids, and there's so much on the regulatory and administrative end, and it just really takes away from what is needed to in terms of focus, and that's the kids being cared for. So those are the initiatives that make up this $100 million, and definitely a welcome investment or allocation, especially since it focuses on those providers. And oftentimes that's a barrier to work for younger workers. We see two major areas where we've lost workforce in the last couple of years: those over age 55 and those 25 and younger. Those are where we've seen the biggest losses in workforce, and one of those factors is children. So welcome news, and something that I think that we'll look to do is sometime in a future, maybe next week or something, we'll get somebody from the state who's responsible for this area to come out in here and just share a little bit more, so that we can ensure that any SBAM member that has an interest in this is in good shape to take advantage.
All right, sounds good. Let's talk about another factor to our future workforce, really, and that is education. So Education Trust Midwest came out with a state-by-state comparison, and they analyzed recent M-STEP results. So that's the standardized testing here in Michigan. What did those findings say?
So the name of their report was Still Stalled, so that that gives you a sense that it was not a positive report. So I think of this in kind of two components. And again, I think we will invite somebody from Ed Trust Midwest to come on to the briefing and kind of get into the details a little more. But basically, they looked at, there's one way of rating states, kind of comparing apples to apples nationwide. One of the difficulties in education, difficult to say, how does one state compare to 50 states, because we have different assessments, different curriculum requirements, different graduation requirements, there's not this uniform, education is not uniform across the country, nor should it be. But comparing is very difficult. There is one standard, though, which is possible to compare states across the board. And the problem is that it takes a long time. So part of this report is looking at the results as of the end of 2019. So where were kids at essentially as they entered into the pandemic? That's the one that can compare everybody across the whole country. It showed Michigan 32nd in terms of fourth grade reading performance, and then 28th for eighth grade math performance compared to other states. But they also, given our trajectories, they kind of projected, and so we haven't made a lot of ground, even though there's been a lot of resources that have been put toward trying to improve early childhood literacy. But they're projecting that Michigan over the next decade, based on the trends and what they see happening, will fall to 39th. So going from 32nd, bottom half, to 39th, getting close to the bottom 10. And so it's really kind of a crisis type of a situation, but it's such a slow moving crisis that it doesn't get a lot of attention. And so figuring out why it is that additional time, attention, focus, resources on some of these tough challenges hasn't really resulted in the type of results that would have been expected is something that we really do need to dig in on. Of course, education is a massive topic with so many different components. Now, even though it's not possible at this point with the state-by-state standard to look and see, well, how do we close 2021? It will be a while before we can do a 50-state comparison, but we can look at Michigan's M-STEP scores and look at proficiency in 2021 across a whole range of subjects. And what we can tell for certain is that students are in worse shape today than they were before the pandemic. So we don't know how we stack up to other states, but we know compared to ourselves in 2020 and 2019 that we have lost more ground in math, reading, science, pretty much across the board. The other thing that the report zeroed in on was the discrepancy between students that were more disadvantaged to start with. So just as an example, Black students were harmed more by remote education than white students. So they lost more ground than their white counterparts. So poverty was another one they looked at, that those communities that have high incidence of poverty and those students that are living in poverty, they lost more ground than the students that didn't. And here's, you might say, well, of course, that that you could guess that, and I would agree. But what I'm saying here is that they were already more behind in 2019. If you look at how much was lost proportionately, not only were they already behind, but they lost more proficiency than their counterparts that are not living in poverty. And if you kind of put all the pieces together, remote learning, support at home and home environments, and access to high-speed internet, and just a whole host of things, it makes sense that these shouldn't be surprising results, but there's still very serious problems for our future. And it's one of the reasons why that we really have engaged so much in education policy discussions. And and I don't think that money is going to be the problem in terms of education, at least not for the foreseeable future. There's so much more, but it's the work that needs to be done to just catch up, to just get our students up to date, back to where they were a few years ago, which was not acceptable a few years ago. Just to get them back to that point is really going to take a lot of intensive work and strategies. So this is, I look at this as, a good baseline. I hope that it serves as a wake-up call, but it's not good news. But it is what it is. I think just embracing that this is where we're at, and now we need to start climbing up from here would be positive. The other thing too, not out of this report, but there was separately the student enrollment numbers in public education across the country are in. So we can look at what public education enrollment overall, how it has changed. And here in Michigan, it has declined. Nationwide, it has declined. So some students found their ways during the pandemic to other forms of instruction. So if public education was not available in a form that was that families and students found to be ideal, many found other places. Some homeschooling, some private schools, some other kind of they might have just found other online type of independent options. But nevertheless, overall public education enrollment has fallen in Michigan, and it fell 8th most in the country. So top 10 state in terms of lost enrollment. So overall, it's kind of a rough, I feel like we just kind of take a bunch of punches right now in terms of as we try to imagine a future where we climb out of the constraints that we have in terms of our size and overall capacity of the workforce. And it's clearly it's going to be a lot of work.
All right, this kind of feels like a big pivot from that report, but I do want to remind everyone that 4 weeks from today is SBAM's annual meeting and Small Business Summit. It's at the Lansing Center, right in downtown Lansing. And today, May 19th, is the final day to get a ticket at the early bird rate. So there's a member and non-member rate. Those go up starting tomorrow. And of course, those of you who watched last week might know that we do have a free ticket offer as well. So if you want to join to get a free ticket or upgrade your membership to get a free ticket, that's available as well. So we'd love to see you at the meeting June 16th. You can learn more right on our website at sbam.org.
If I could put in a word on the annual meeting, please do consider coming. It's a great opportunity to see, on this briefing, you hear about, public policy issues and things that are coming through that maybe a little more in depth than what you see in the news, or kind of curating some of that information, this girth of information that is always coming at us. But at the annual meeting, you see a picture of all the things that SBAM does, the things that we're involved in. We recognize, by the way, it's really an inspirational time. Our Advocate of the Year is recognized, a member that has really stepped up and taken on a leadership role in being an advocate for business in a very public way. Also, we recognize Legislators of the Year, the ones that have outstanding records, that didn't just say they were pro small business, but actually delivered on it. We have the turnover, a new leadership on our board of directors. We do the overall kind of annual report, as you imagine. It's our annual meeting, and this year's theme is business in transition. There's so much transition happening right now, profiling 3 different types of transition, and then from actual members that are gonna share their stories, and then beyond that, there's breakout sessions with a lot of awesome content and then exhibitor booths too. So across the board, this is a great way to see a broad view of the things that SBM does. If you are already involved with us and you know these things, it's a great way to just connect with your friends, because everybody's going to be there. It's their biggest one of the year. And then, if you're new to us or maybe found us during the pandemic and haven't been to one of these, I really encourage you to come. It's a great event, one of the best SBAM days of the year.
Absolutely. Come, find us, say hi, and introduce yourselves. So that's all we have for you today. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll be back here on Monday.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Monday.